I never imagined that a simple favor from my neighbor would lead to a night I would never forget. But life, as it tends to, always finds a way to surprise us when we least expect it. It was a warm, muggy evening in mid-July when I heard a knock at my front door. I'd just finished cleaning up after dinner, the scent of garlic and herbs lingering in the air. My home was quiet, save for the distant hum of cicadas and the faint sound of a late-night talk show drifting from the living room. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door, I was caught off guard. There stood Ethan, my neighbor's son, a tall, broad-shouldered young man of 24. His dark hair was damp from the summer heat. I'd known him since he was a teenager, always polite, always with a friendly smile. But now, standing in the soft glow of my porch light, he seemed different somehow. "Hey, Mrs. Callahan," he greeted, his deep voice carrying a hint of hesitation. "Sorry to bother you so late, but I was wondering if you could give me a ride." I wiped my hands on the dish towel I was holding. "A ride? Where to?" "Just across town," he said, scratching the back of his neck, looking a little sheepish. "My car broke down, and my mom's already asleep. I'd call a cab, but I left my wallet at home." I paused for a moment. It was late, and I was in my comfy night clothes, just an old t-shirt and some loose pajama pants. But I'd always had a soft spot for Ethan. He was a good kid, responsible and kind. I sighed, shaking my head with a small smile. "Give me 5 minutes to change." "Thanks, Mrs. C. I really appreciate it," he grinned. 15 minutes later, we were on the road. Our small town was quiet at this hour, street lights casting long shadows across the pavement. The air conditioner in my car struggled against the summer heat, and the faint scent of lavender air freshener filled the cabin. "So, what happened to your car?" I asked, glancing at him as I drove. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "Battery's dead. I think I left my headlights on too long." I chuckled. "That's an expensive mistake." "Tell me about it," he groaned. The radio played softly in the background, a slow, bluesy tune that seemed to match the quiet intimacy of the moment. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was a strange weight in the air, something unspoken hanging between us. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt it. Eventually, Ethan broke the silence. "You ever just think about how fast time flies?" I glanced at him. "All the time." "I swear I was just in high school last year," he said, looking out the window. "Now I'm trying to figure out my life, and I feel like I'm already behind." I nodded, understanding all too well. Life has a way of making us feel like we're running out of time, no matter how young or old we are. He turned his head toward me, his gaze lingering just a bit too long. "You ever feel that way?" I swallowed. There was something in his voice, an earnestness, a quiet yearning that made my heart beat a little faster. "All the time," I admitted. The conversation took an unexpected turn. We talked about life, about dreams left behind, about the things we wished we'd done differently. I told him about my youth, about the risks I hadn't taken, the love I'd lost, and the chances I'd let slip through my fingers. Somewhere along the way, I realized Ethan wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about me, about us, and something had been quietly growing between us in the stillness of the night. By the time we reached his destination, a dimly lit apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the air between us was thick with something neither of us wanted to name. He hesitated before opening the door. "Mrs. C, He started. "Ethan." My voice was soft, but firm. He exhaled, shaking his head. "Never mind." But as he stepped out of the car, he turned back. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, the world around us faded away. Then, just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the night. I barely slept that night. My mind replayed our conversation, the way Ethan had looked at me, as if he saw something more in me than just his neighbor. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into a simple moment, but deep down, I knew better. Morning came, and with it, an uneasy restlessness. I moved through my routine on autopilot, coffee, a morning walk, watering my plants, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I wasn't expecting to see Ethan again so soon. It was just past noon when there was another knock at my door. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated before opening it, my hand hovering over the doorknob for a moment, too long. And then, there he was. He looked different in the daylight. The warm afternoon sun cast a soft glow on his tan skin, making the sharp angles of his jawline more pronounced. His dark hair was a little messy, and his gray t-shirt clung to his broad frame in a way I hadn't really noticed before. "Hey," he said, his voice a little rough, like he'd been thinking about this visit as much as I had. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause. Too long. Too weighted. Finally, I broke the silence. "Everything okay?" He let out a breath, shifting his weight. "Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for last night." I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You already thanked me." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to do it properly." He lifted a small brown paper bag and held it out to me. "It's from that little cafe on Main. I remembered you liked their pastries." That caught me off guard. I took the bag, my fingers brushing against his, and for a brief second, that same tension from the night before sparked again. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice softer this time. "I wanted to." I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. We sat in my kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee and buttery pastries filling the air. He sipped his drink, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup absent-mindedly. "You seemed different last night," he said, breaking the silence. Finally, Ethan glanced up at me, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" he asked. I sighed, searching for the right words. "I don't know. Just quieter. More serious than usual." He ran a hand through his hair. "I guess I was just thinking a lot about—" He hesitated, then finally looked me in the eye. "About you." My stomach dipped. "Ethan." "I know this is probably crazy," he said quickly, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "And I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but last night, something felt different, didn't it?" I swallowed, gripping my coffee cup a little tighter. I could lie, I could brush it off, but we both knew the truth. "Yes," I admitted, barely above a whisper. A slow exhale left his lips, like he'd been holding his breath. "I don't know when it started," he murmured. "Maybe it's always been there, and I just didn't realize it until now." My heart pounded against my ribs. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was 28 years older than him. I had known him since he was a teenager, but last night, and even now, it wasn't a kid sitting in front of me. It was a man who was looking at me like I was something he had wanted for a long time. I should have stopped it. Should have put an end to whatever this was before it could go any further. But then he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine, lingering there, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself wonder, what if I didn't walk away? I should have pulled my hand away. I should have laughed it off, turned the moment into a joke, or gently reminded Ethan that I was his neighbor, that this was ridiculous. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, my fingers still beneath his, the warmth of his touch seeping into my skin. My heart pounded, and the air in my kitchen suddenly felt too thick, too charged. Ethan didn't move, didn't push. He just watched me, waiting, his deep brown eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. His gaze never wavered. Finally, I exhaled, pulling my hand back, breaking whatever had just passed between us. "Ethan," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "This is unexpected." He finished for me. "Complicated." I let out a breathless laugh. "That's one way to put it." He leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck, a small, almost nervous smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I didn't plan this, I swear, but last night, being with you, talking to you, I realized something." I waited. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice low, measured. "I've never met anyone like you." A small, sharp pang went through me. "Ethan, I'm 52, I said, barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, lips quirking up. "And you're a grown woman." He interrupted, holding my gaze. "I know what I'm feeling. I'm not confused." I pressed my palms against the table, trying to steady myself. "This isn't about confusion. It's about reality." "You what?" he asked gently. "Too young." "Does it really matter?" I swallowed hard. "Maybe it should." He studied me for a long moment. "Is that what you really think? Or is that just what you think you're supposed to say?" That hit somewhere deep. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I had spent years telling myself what was appropriate, what was right. I had been careful, cautious. But the way Ethan looked at me, the way he made me feel seen, noticed, it was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. "Ethan," I sighed, shaking my head. "This isn't simple." He smiled, and there was something both boyish and undeniably confident in it. "I don't mind complicated." A laugh escaped me, unexpected and light. "Of course you don't." His grin widened. "I'm serious. I don't know where this goes. I don't know what it means, but I do know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, and I don't want to pretend like last night didn't happen." Neither did I. I stood up, needing space, needing to clear my head. I walked over to the sink, gripping the edge of the counter. I could feel him behind me, close, but not too close. "If we do this," I whispered, "we can't undo it." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then his voice, calm and steady. "I know." I turned around slowly, facing him, letting the truth settle between us. This wasn't a decision I could make lightly, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to say no. I should have said no. I should have walked Ethan to the door, thanked him for the pastries, and sent him on his way. I should have ignored the way my heart raced when he looked at me like I was something more than just his neighbor, more than just a woman who had lived a life before he was even born. But I didn't. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me. Steady. Certain. He wasn't a boy. He wasn't unsure. He knew exactly what he was feeling. The question was, could I allow myself to feel the same? Morning came, bringing with it a new kind of clarity. I didn't want to live in fear of what was expected of me. I had spent too much of my life making the right choices, following the proper path. And where had it led me? To quiet nights spent alone, to moments where I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I wanted to feel alive again. A few days passed before I saw him again. I was outside watering my garden when I heard his voice. "Hey, stranger." I turned, shielding my eyes from the sun, and there he was, leaning against his car, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "You've been avoiding me," he said, though there was no accusation in his tone. "I needed to think," I admitted. He nodded as if he understood. I let out a slow breath. "And I'm scared." He stepped closer, his presence grounding. Of what? Of what this means, of what people will think, of getting hurt. His expression softened. "I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise it won't get messy. But I can promise I won't hurt you, and I don't care what anyone else thinks." I searched his face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of doubt. There was none. It would be so easy to let fear win, to tell myself this was foolish, impossible. But standing there with Ethan, looking at me like I was worth the risk, I realized something. I didn't want to run anymore. So I didn't. I reached for his hand, letting my fingers slide against his, locking us together in a quiet, unspoken agreement. And when he smiled, slow, genuine, filled with something deeper than just attraction, I knew I had made the right choice. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing, I was living. Please remember to like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to my channel for additional content.